evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to the third week of the BioTalk series hosted by the Department of Biotechnology from St. Joseph's College of Engineering. The topic for this session is bioconjugation of therapeutic enzyme uricase for gout disease, and it will be given by Dr. P. E. Jagadish Babu. Before we begin, I have a few instructions for the participants to ensure the smooth sailing of the event. Please do not introduce yourselves in the chat box. Post any questions you have in the chat box and they will be answered at the end. If you face any technical difficulties at any point, relay them in the chat box as well and we will look into it. Submission of the feedback form is necessary to receive the e-certificate and the link will be posted sometime during the event. Lastly, I request you all to use your earphones for better quality. Now, I call upon the organizer, Ms. G. Kalavati, to deliver the welcome speech.
Hello and good evening everyone. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Department of Biotechnology, St. Joseph's College of Engineering. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to welcome the speaker of today's session and all participants including faculties, research scholars and students from various institutes across the country. I also extend my warm welcome to the head of the department, my dear colleagues and students to the webinar BioTalk series, week 3 on bioconjugation of therapeutic enzyme uricase for gout disease. Once again, I am glad to welcome the speaker of today's session, Dr. P. E. Jagdish Babu, Department of Chemical Engineering, NIT, Surathkal. You're welcome, sir. Now I request our head of the department, Dr. G. Srikumar sir, to give inaugural address. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to see you all again in BioTalk lecture series week 3 event. I should proudly say that our department keeps our students and other regular participants abreast with the current trends of biotech research even in this lockdown period. For the sake of newly joined participants, I wish to highlight some credits about our college and the department. St. Joseph College of Engineering, one of the top colleges in India with the 160th position as per current NIRF ranking. It has got 26 years of high reputation in educational society with the NAC A+ grade of accreditation. It is having 10 UG programs and 7 PG programs with an affiliation from Anna University, Chennai. Our Department of Biotechnology is started in the year 2002 and having BTech and MTech programs in it. Since inception, we have bagged 139 university ranks with 10 golds and 7 silver medals with 100% pass percentage. The department has got high-end sophisticated laboratory facilities and fetched a research center recognition from Anna University to do PhD and is having more than 1.1 crores of rupees as government funding to conduct research in this. Today's lecture is going to be a research topic in medical biotechnology. In fact, I have referred a popular international biotech job seekers website. For the last 1 week, the total jobs related in biotechnology was available 2,609. Out of this, medical biotech jobs alone was 2,217, which constitutes 85% of that. Still, medical research jobs were 1,446, which again constituting 61% of the total available jobs. This signifies the importance of medical biotech research and its career opportunities available for the students and young biotechnologists. By keeping all these things in mind, the Department of Biotechnology has decided to organize this week BioTalk lecture series on medical biotech research arena. Bioconjugation of therapeutic enzyme uricase for gout disease is today's topic. Gout disease is a kind of arthritis caused by the buildup of uric acid crystals in the joints that cause joint pains, kidney stones, and because of the accumulation of uric acid crystals in the body. It's a metabolic syndrome that affects more than 10 million people per year in India. Both lifestyle changes, medication, and proper diet alone can decrease uric acid level in the body. To give more information towards gout disease and enzymatic research and therapy, etc., today we have an eminent personality, Dr. P.E. Jagadish Babu, who is an associate professor in Chemical Engineering Department of National Institute of Technology, Surathkal, India. He would be sharing his views of uricase enzyme research and as a chemical engineering point of view and perspective. At this moment, I wish to comment about our participants also. There are 527 registered participants. Out of that, 101 are the faculty and 361 members are the UG and PG students. There are 41 research scholars and 24 industrial persons are there in the participants list. The Indian participants are spreading from 18 Indian states, and international participants are from 5 countries such as Poland, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Bangladesh. With this proud note, on behalf of the patrons of the college, Dr. B.B. Babu Manohar, Chairman Sir, Ms. Jessipriya Madam, Managing Director, Mr. Sashi Shekhar Sir, Director, Dr. V. Seshagiri Rao, Principal Sir, and Dr. Parvatavardhini Madam, Dean, I welcome the invited speaker and all the participants for this week 3 BioTalk lecture series. I take this opportunity to convey my warm felicitation to the organizers, Dr. V. Renuka and Ms. G. Kalavati, and my dear student coordinators also. And I also extend my best wishes for the success of this webinar. All the best. Thank you. Over to Swatika.
Thank you for your kind words, sir. We will now go ahead into the session. I have the great pleasure of introducing the speaker for today's session, Dr. P.E. Jagadish Babu. He completed his bachelor's in chemical engineering from Madras University and his master's in chemical and energy engineering from NIT Trichy. He then obtained his doctorate from AC Tech Anna University, also in chemical engineering. He has worked in significant projects like the synthesis and characterization of spion-embedded inorganic hollow core shell nanoparticle as magnetic drug delivery vector with the CSRI of India, and for synthesis of nanothermosensitive hydrogels for drug delivery system with DST India. He has published papers in several well-renowned journals such as the Journal of Biomaterial Science, International Journal of Peptide Research and Therapeutics, Asia Pacific Journals of Chemical Engineering, and in the International Journal of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. These are part of several other journals that he has published in. He has received various awards and is a recipient of the Young Scientist Award from the Department of Science and Technology under SCRC Fast Track Scheme of 2009 to 2012. His areas of interest include drug delivery system, kinetic modeling, nanoparticle synthesis, and hydride membranes. Dr. Jagadish is currently an associate professor in the Department of Chemical Engineering at NITK Surathkal. Sir, it gives us an immense pleasure to have you join us today. I request you to take over the session.
So you could have seen my photo in the introduction slide, and now you can see how I look. So this is the cause of lockdown. Okay, just as a jovial note. I'm Dr. P. Jagadish Babu, and one of your student has given enough introduction about me, and I'm going to today talk about due to lockdown. Now we are doing some institutes are doing webinar, and I would like to thank the department head and organizing a committee and the in charge of the organizing committee for giving a chance to talk about one of my research area, that is bioconjugation of uricase from Orthobacterial globiforms for gout disease. I may take another 30 to 40 minutes and then I'll wind up my session. So this is my first slide, and first image may be so appetizing and so mouth-watering. Of course, to everyone it may be so appetizing and mouth-watering, but for few in India or for few people in the world, this may be a dangerous food. The reason is all these foods, particularly fish, red meat, chicken, and few grains and few citrus fruits are very rich in purine. That's why the topic what I have given for this slide is purine rich food. Normally we won't see what is there in the food we normally eat based on the taste, aroma and its appearance. I just started to look into the content of the food, and all these foods have very rich purine. And of course, all the food material or all the foods have a purine, but a few foods have a very less quantity of a purine. So that the materials or the food items which are listed in the table as a less purine content. For example, broccoli, which has only 81 milligram. Out of 100 grams, if you consume 100 grams of a broccoli, it means that you are consuming 81 grams of a purine. So like that, a spinach has a 57 grams of a purine. So you may start to wonder why this fellow is talking about a purine, or why as an audience, or why as a human, we have to think about a purine. So normally, you should know how purine is metabolized. So purine is metabolized into a xanthin, and xanthin is metabolized into uric acid. Of course, uric acid is further metabolized, and these are the main metabolized product in human body. So once if you take purine, for example, in the afternoon, some of you might have taken any one of this, which is there in this photo. Maybe it might have had a high purine content. It means that so there is a possibility of a production of a uric acid in your body. So purine will be first metabolized into xanthin, and xanthin will be then metabolized into uric acid. So what happens to this uric acid? So uric acid is a chemical, and it has its own significant, or it has its own typical property, and that property makes a problem in human body. Now let us see what happens to this uric acid. So before seeing what is going to happen to this uric acid, let us see the evolution of a human diet. So evolution means I'm going to talk from the evolution. So from the forest ape, and then woodland apes, and then first Homo minins and Homo habilis, and Homo erectans and Homo sapiens. So up to this Homo erectans, we used to eat only the raw food. We used to eat, initially we started to eat only fruits, and then we started to explore new fruits, new vegetables, and we were eating only the raw food, means raw fruits and raw vegetables. Slowly we started to eat fleshes, and then we started to fry, cook and eat fleshes. And up to this, till Homo erectans, humans could able to convert uric acid, because the typical property of uric acid is its solubility. Uric acid will not that much soluble in blood or that much soluble in water, so its solubility is very less. You might have heard about this word solubility in mass transfer. So it has a less solubility. So what human body did is, human body could able to convert this partially soluble uric acid into highly soluble compound. So what is that highly soluble compound? Here I have written uric acid is a partially soluble compound, and that uric acid is converted into allantoin, which is highly soluble compared to uric acid, till Homo erectans. And once we started to eat these cooked food, fried food with all masalas, and obviously that has changed our lifestyle and that has changed our environment. I won't only say this food habit alone has created some changes in the human body. Obviously, when we started to cook and eat, it means that we have entered into a comfort zone. Instead of searching, instead of eating food for just hunger, we started to eat food for our pleasure. So we started to cook it. We started to increase its appearance. We started to enhance its enhance its taste for our comfortness, not for hunger. So slowly humans started to enter into the comfort zone. Now we cannot live without AC, we cannot live without car, we cannot live without cell phone. All these gadgets are not the fundamental or basic requirement of a human. All these components are the requirements for the comfortness of a human. Okay, so if I say I'm comfortably living, it means that I should have a car, I should have an AC, I should have a cell phone, and all these change the lifestyle of a human. So not only food, even the lifestyle environment created some changes in the human body. Okay, what change a human body faced? Formation of a free radical. Then you may ask, sir, before that Homo erectans, don't we produce a free radical? Of course, we produce, or our human body produced free radical, but the amount of a free radical what the human body produced before the Homo erectans was less. That's why body didn't bothered about those free radicals. Once we started to change the lifestyle, once we started to eat as we like, eat without thinking, once we started to pollute our environment, the formation of a free radical in the human body increased. Now, what that free radical, of course, these are the parameters I have written. Of course, the nature itself has an ability to produce a free radical in the human body, that is a UV light and air pollution and ionizing radiations. For example, if you are exposed to X-ray, if you are exposed to some other ionizing radiations, normally the free radical generation in the body will be very high. Okay, for example, if you smoke, and among all these, your metabolism also plays a major role. Okay, what these free radical did to the humans when the humans were evolving, so it started to damage the DNA. So these free radicals started to damage the DNA. So obviously, what the human body should do, of course, human body has an intelligence. Of course, it has a intelligence. So when it started to feel these free radicals are damaging the DNAs, so it has to evolve a procedure or a step or a method to stop this DNA degradation. So what it did, so it started to find an antioxidant. Okay, now we are talking about antioxidant. You think about some 1,000 years back. So we never thought about antioxidant because we don't know what is antioxidant in those days. So we didn't take antioxidant rich food because we don't know what is antioxidant those days. So somebody else should do this. So body itself could able to do this because body has an auto intelligence. So this is the image what the antioxidant is going to do. So there is an LT atom, there is a free radical. So since a free radical is fall short of one electron, it will try to steal one electron, or I should not use the word steal. Just for understanding purpose, I'm using the word steal. So it tries to steal one electron from the healthy atom. So thereby it is going to damage the human body. So what antioxidant will do, antioxidant will have excess electron. So it will donate its excess electron to the free radical and it will try to stabilize the free radical. Thereby free radical won't steal electron from the healthy atom. So free radical won't disturb the healthy atom. So the free radical won't damage the tissues or won't damage the DNA. So now this is the funda behind the reduction of a free radical in the human body. Then now you can think what human body might have done 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago. So the human body started to search antioxidant within the body. Okay, so through his search, it could able to find a most powerful, abundant, endogenous plasma antioxidant available in our body is uric acid. Okay, so I'm going back to the slide. So before this human erectant, body could able to convert uric acid into allantoin. So now after entering into this Homo sapiens age, so body now thinks that uric acid is the best antioxidant. So if I stop the conversion of uric acid into allantoin, I can use uric acid as a a scavenging element, and I can reduce the free radicals, and I can safeguard the body to some extent. Obviously, it is a trade-off. So I said uric acid has a less solubility, and obviously now the listeners may think uric acid has a less solubility, then whether that partially soluble nature of uric acid will give rise to some other problem or not. Obviously, it will give some other problem. Now, compared to the problems that will be created because of the increase in the concentration of uricase, the DNA denaturation or the damage to DNA is very important. Okay, so that's why body started to use the uric acid as an antioxidant. And of course, I have mentioned one literature here, the free radical scavenging mechanism of uricase, that is the thermodynamics of NH bond cleavage, which is published in Computational and Theoretical Chemistry. You can just go through that, and you can see how good antioxidant the uricase is. So now what the body should do? The body should stop the conversion of uric acid into allantoin. That's what it did. So how it did? So how a body did it? So it inactivated the DNA sequence 82G26230. So this gene sequence is responsible for the conversion of uric acid to allantoin. Of course, this gene sequence is not directly responsible for the conversion of uric acid. Of course, genes cannot do any extracellular chemical conversion. So it inactivated the DNA sequence 82G26230, and this gene sequence is responsible for the production of an enzyme which is called as uricase. And how to prove this? Now, if you take any bird or any animals apart from mammals, those animals have still the ability to produce uricase, and those uricase could able to convert uric acid into allantoin. Okay, for example, pigeon, for example, hen. So these are the animals which has a still active DNA sequence, that is 82G26230, which is responsible for the production of uricase, and then that uricase in turn converts the uric acid to allantoin. Of course, this gene sequence is there in human body, but it is an inactive gene sequence. That's why it could not able to produce an active uricase in the human body. Since it could not able to produce active enzyme, that is uricase, it cannot convert uric acid into allantoin. So now there are two directions. One is your body has stopped producing uricase because it wants to stop the conversion of uric acid into allantoin, because it felt 1,000 or 10,000 years back, it felt uric acid is a abundant and effective antioxidant, so that can scavenge your free radicals. So that's why it stopped the conversion by inactivating it. Now, how this inactivation has affected the human evolution? That's why I've written effect of inactivation. Of course, this inactivation has advantage and disadvantage. What is advantage? Of course, till now we discussed about the advantage of inactivation. What is that advantage? It could able to reduce the free radical in the human body. So since you are eating as you like, since you are living as you like, the free radical generation or free radical formation in the body is more. The uric acid which is present, or which will be the end product of a purine. Okay, if you take a purine-rich product, or if you take purine-rich food, it will end in uric acid. And uric acid, since if you have high concentration uric acid in your body, that will scavenge all the free radicals. But that leads to some other problem, which are nothing but chances of increase in the uric acid. So your uric acid concentration in the blood will increase. Obviously, that will lead to higher load for the kidney. So kidney has to remove all those uric acid through your pee or through your pore. And the chances of solidification of uric acid, when sometimes, of course, I'll tell you. So this uric acid may crystallize, Of course, this may lead to a major problem, heart failure, and many other minor problems. So now every human has inactive DNA, which is responsible for the production of uric acid. Then you may ask, sir, all the humans are facing these problems or these disadvantages. No. All the humans in this world is not facing all these problems because of the inactivation of the DNA sequence. The people who could not able to control their lifestyle, who could not able to maintain their lifestyle, who could not able to have a healthy, good, effective lifestyle will face these problems. Of course, now these young generations are moving towards that unhealthy lifestyle. It means that the percentage of population that will be affected by gout or hyperuricemia or gout flare will increase. And of course, it is increasing. So that increasing trend itself is an evidence that we are, or the young generation is moving towards unhealthy food habits, unhealthy social parameters. Okay. So now this is the typical uric acid or a purine metabolic pathway. So all this GPM, IPM, and APM will finally end in xanthin. Okay. So and then this xanthin is converted into urate or uric acid. So there is an xanthin oxidase which reduces xanthin to uric acid, and this uric acid will not be further converted into any other product. This uric acid has to be eliminated through urine by your kidney or through your some other agents. Okay. So since many of you are biotechnologists, you can easily understand what is GPM, IPM, APM, and all these catalyzed reactions. Okay. So now, what will happen to this uric acid? So if uric acid is less than 5 milligram per deciliter, or if it is less than 300 micromoles per liter or 0.3 millimoles per liter, then it is safe. It means that you are in the safer zone. And if it is between 5 to 6 milligram per deciliter, you are still in the safer zone. And if it is 6 to 7, it is a warning sign. If it is over 7, it is dangerous. So normal blood uric acid level is 7 milligram per deciliter in male and 6 milligram per deciliter in female. So what will happen if the uric acid level in the blood goes beyond this 7 and 6? This will happen. Okay. So this uric acid, which has a lesser solubility, will be converted into uric acid crystals. So this is how the crystals will look like. This is the SEM image of uric acid crystals. And you can see how the uric acid crystal looks like. It looks like a needle. Okay, if it is a spherical particle, of course, it won't get accumulated in the joints, that too in the below the hip. It will be circulating along with the bloodstream, and it will start to accumulate wherever it like or wherever it faces a huge amount of drag force or huge amount of frictional resistance. But since it is in the needle form, once it reaches the bottom of your body, it cannot climb up. It cannot be pulled up by your blood because it is in the needle form. The drag force will be very less. So it will start to accumulate in the joints, particularly in the leg, in the knee. In these places, these will come and accumulate. So this is the image. So where you could able to see where the uric acid crystals are accumulating, and since these crystals are accumulating, it will lead to a swelling. So these are the photograph of a person who has this gout disease. So all these bulgings are nothing but the places where these uric acid crystals are accumulated. Normally, generally, it is called as gout arthritis, which is inflammatory arthritis. So, and this is the disease which was detected in 2640 BC itself. So this is the proof that this is because of evolution. So this is the disease which was detected in the before Christ, and between 1 to 2% of the adults are affected by this disease. That's what statistics says. So, and this is in the increasing trend, and this is still increasing. And if you search today, this may be beyond 2 also. And this value, what I've quoted here, or what I've mentioned in this slide, is some 10 years back value. Okay. So now how this gout disease is treated now? Okay. So these are the 4 different treatment methods, FDA approved treatment method. And out of these 4 treatment methods, few treatment methods are followed in India, because few treatment methods are not commercialized or not practiced in India. So one is by giving a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and then urate synthesis inhibitors. And of course, I'm not going to discuss about the first 3 methods. I'm going to discuss about the last method, which is a recent method, which is nothing but urate synthesis inhibitor. So the topic itself says something is going to inhibit the urate synthesis. So now, which is the raw material for the synthesis of urate in the body? Xanthin is the raw material for the synthesis of urate in the body. So now people started to inhibit this conversion, or inhibit the enzyme which is responsible for the conversion of xanthin to uric acid, which is generally called as xanthin inhibitor. So it is also called as urate synthesis inhibitor. It is also called as xanthin inhibitors. So it will inhibit it will deactivate the xanthinase enzyme. So thereby you can stop the production of uric acid in the body. So the medicine which is used to inhibit the xanthin is allopurinol. Okay, still it is commercially available. Still many practitioners are using this allopurinol. But this allopurinol is a chemical-based compound. Obviously, it will lead to many side effects. I have listed out few side effects here. You will start to get drowsiness. You will start to get headache. Some people may get a diarrhea. I'm not telling people, all the people who are taking allopurinol will get all these symptoms. And I can definitely say everybody will get one or the other symptoms if they take allopurinol. So one is a drowsiness, headache, diarrhea, vomiting, stomach discomfort, change of taste, muscle pain, and severity is a blood in the urine, blood in the motion. So all these are the reported as side effects of these treatments. So now, since we have these many side effects, people started to think about the alternate for this treatment method. So alternate is, of course, alternate is therapeutic enzymes. So I have just listed out a few commercially available therapeutic enzymes, and even I have listed out the diseases. For example, cancer, they are using arginase and other enzymes. All these are called as a therapeutic enzymes because they are used to treat a disease. And our uricase comes in this category. So cardiovascular disease, of course, if uric acid is rich, or if the uric acid concentration goes beyond 7 milligram per deciliter, you will get cardiovascular disease, 100%. Okay, so that's why for cardiovascular disease, gout, so uricase, which is a therapeutic enzyme, can be used. Now, of course, uricase is an enzyme. Since all of you are biotechnologists, you know how to produce uricase, or you know the source for uricase. So microbial source is the best source for the production of uricase. Of course, few plants have uricase, but the concentration of uricase in those plants are very small. Obviously, the extraction of uricase from those plants are going to be expensive and time consuming. The best cheap and economical method will be producing uricase from the microorganism, either fungal, bacteria, or bacteria. So this is how the uricase will look like. I'm not going to discuss about the production of uricase. You can just browse the literatures. Even we have published a few papers on the production of uricase from different strains. So now this is how this is the three-dimensional 3D structure of uricase from Orthobacter globifemis. And of course, the property of uricase depends on the microorganism. So few microorganisms can produce highly active uricase. Few microorganisms can produce a low active uricase. Few microorganisms can produce highly active uricase, but their stability may be very less. So you cannot store even for 1 day. So it may be very highly active, but you cannot, when you cannot store it for a longer period of time, then there is no meaning in using, or there is no meaning in banking on those high active uricase. Then you may ask, sir, why we need high active uricase? Of course, when you have high active uricase, since you people have studied reaction engineering, so activity of a catalyst plays a major role. Now this uric acid is a catalyst which is going to catalyze the conversion of uric acid into allantoin. So if the catalyst is highly active, then you can imagine what benefit you will get. So normally researchers are targeting on or researchers are looking for the microorganism which can produce an highly active uricase. At the same time, it should be stable. And it should be stable with respect to temperature, it should be stable with respect to pH, and then it should be stable with respect to other parameters. So since till now we could not able to identify a microorganism which can produce an highly active uricase, there is a huge scope for the production of highly active uricase, or for the identification of a microorganism which can produce highly active uricase, or how to use the recombinant technology to produce an highly active uricase. So some microorganism may have a capability to produce highly active uricase, but that highly active uricase may have a less stability. So can I use the recombinant technology to introduce that bacterial genome into a fungal, and then can I use that fungal strain to produce high active uricase? So in this area also research is going on. Still research is going on, and many pharmaceutical companies are doing. And let us come back to this slide. So this is the three-dimensional structure of uricase. It is a tetramer. It has 4 subunits, and its molecular weight is 30 kilodalton, of course. And 30 kilodalton means one subunit has a 30 kilodalton, and this is the chemistry of the catalytic reaction. Okay, so this is the structure of uric acid, and this is the final structure of allantoin. What is the difference between uric acid and allantoin? Don't say its chemical structure. I'm asking about the solubility. So uric acid is highly soluble, partially soluble. Allantoin is highly soluble. So to convert uric acid into allantoin, we are going to use this catalyst. So this catalyst is going to catalyze. These are the intermediate catalytic steps for the conversion of uric acid to allantoin. Okay, this is what happening. Then you may ask, immediately you may think, what is big deal in this? I can produce uricase. Since I'm a biotechnologist, I can use as many downstream process as possible, and I can purify this uricase to the maximum possible extent, and I can use this. I can directly inject it in the human body. That is not possible, because you people are biotechnologists. You know why that is not possible, and that is not feasible, and that is we could not able to do that. That's why people like us are doing research in this area. We could not able to inject a high pure uricase as such in the body. Why? Because of the limitations. So these are the limitations, few limitations. So body immune response, of course, uricase is a foreign body which is from the microbial source. As soon as you inject uricase, your immune system will start to respond. As soon as your immune system start to respond, it will produce antibodies. And as soon as antibodies are produced, you will start to get side effects. Then, sir, just now you said chemical-based medicines are also having side effects, and you are telling this uricase will also have a side effects. Then what is the advantage of using this uricase? Compared to the side effects of chemical-based drug, the side effects of uricase-based drugs are very less. Okay, that is one advantage. Okay, and it has and other disadvantage of uric acid, it has a very short circulating of life, and obviously it will be easily denatured because of the proteolytic enzyme in the intracellular space of the body or in the blood plasma. So now how to overcome this? Now we have found uric acid is the best medicine because uric acid has a less side effect compared to the chemical based drug. So I can use uric acid, but still uric acid has a other problems. And now how to overcome those other problems? So you may think, sir, won't this proteolytic enzyme degrade chemical based drug? Of course, it will degrade, but it cannot degrade to that extent. So obviously, if you use uric acid, this proteolytic enzyme degradation or the degradation of uric acid because of this proteolytic enzyme will be very high, and it has off. That's why it has a circulating of life. So now, how to overcome these problems? So to overcome these problems, somehow I should hide this enzyme from the immune system and from these proteolytic enzyme. Okay, that is no other way. I have to use uric acid. How to? Of course, I can inject uric acid into the human body. Once I inject, that will be easily detected by our immune system, and obviously these proteolytic enzyme will start to degrade it. So obviously it cannot stay for a longer period of a time. If it cannot stay for a longer period of a time, I have to increase my dosage. When I increase my dosage, when I increase my uric acid dosage, obviously side effects will increase. Okay, and either I have to increase the concentration or I have to increase the number of dosages. Okay, for example, a diabetic patient, if it is a highly diabetic patient, if the sugar level is not controlled by normal conventional tablets, doctors normally prescribe insulin. They will initially prescribe 1 dose per day. Even if it is not controlled, 2 doses per day, morning and evening. Even if it is not controllable, then 3 doses. What they are doing, they are increasing the dosage. So similar thing can happen here, and if you increase the dosage, obviously side effects are increasing. So that's why how to reduce the dosage and how to mask this enzyme and how to escape from this immune system is the major task or major problem in this research. So now how to do this? Masking this uric acid. So how to mask this? I cannot just take an envelope or I cannot buy a cover and cover this uric acid. So when I say uric acid, one subunit of uric acid has a 30 kilodalton molecular weight. You can imagine how small it will be. So when it is a very small, I cannot use a simple cover and cover it. Okay. So what should I do? I should somehow cover it, but how to cover it? So if I can attach something on the surface, I can cover it. Then how to attach? There are 2 ways to attach. One is by physically you can attach or by chemically you can attach. You know the difference between a physical attachment and a chemical attachment. Physical attachment is a weak attachment and a chemical attachment is a strong attachment. I don't want to use a physical attachment. I want to have a strong attachment. So if I want to have a strong attachment, I should search for chemical species on the surface of the uric acid. And uric acid is a therapeutic enzyme. It has a n number of amino acids. So now that is the clue for me to attach something on the surface of the uric acid. So since amino acids, different types of amino acids are there, and on the surface of uric acid, few amino acids may be there. I'm using may be there. Till now, I didn't discuss about those amino acids. So I can make use of those amino acids. Now, these are the different types of amino acids, you know. So glycine, alanine, valine, trypsin, lysine. So many amino acids are there. But if you take uric acid, all these amino acids will not be there on the surface. I can access only surface of the amino acids, surface area of the amino acids. If I want to access the inner surface of the amino acids, that's why I showed the 3-dimensional structure of uric acid, uric acid. So you could able to see how complex the uric acid is. So I cannot that easily penetrate into the uric acid. So I can just access the surface of the uric acid. Now I should know what are the surface accessible amino acids. So that I can do a covalent binding. I know what is amino acid. One amine and one acid will be there. You also know what is an amino acid, a combination of amine and acid, which is coupled using a peptide bond, is nothing but amino acids. Okay, so I can use either that amine or I can use that acid. Okay, for my attachment. So I have to know which are the. Of course, all these amino acids won't have will have a different number of amine and carboxylic group. So I need to know which amino acid is there on the surface so that I will come to know. So the number of amines and number of carboxyl group present on the surface. So literature survey says it has lysine, so it has epsilon NH2, and it has a cysteine, so it has a S bond, and it has an N-terminal alpha amino acid, which has NH2. So now I know what are the functional groups or what are the groups that are available on the surface of the amino acids. So now I'm going to use those amino acids and I'm going to cover. How to cover? So this is the pictorial, or this is the diagram. So the colored portion in the center of that rotating structure is nothing but uric acid. And the gray color coiled like structure which is covering the amino acid is the compound that is attached on the surface of the amino acids. So by doing this, what I can achieve, so now itself, if you want to know what is it, you have to deeply observe, oh, there is a colored ball inside that, and on the surface there is a coiled structure. So through your naked eyes itself, you could not able to identify in the first attempt itself. So imagine how your immune system will act. So obviously you can escape this immune system. So now this coiled-like structure which are attached on the surface of the uric acid will give certain advantage, will give certain benefits. What are those? It will increase the body residence time, and it will reduce the immunogenicity, and it will enhance the permeation and retention, and new possibilities of drug targeting, and you can increase even the stability of the therapeutic enzyme. So now, how to do this? The best and established and commercially available method is pegylation. So what is a pegylation? Pegylation is nothing but attaching a polyethylene glycol molecule on the surface of the uric acid. You know polyethylene glycol. For a very long time, we are using polyethylene glycol in the different products. You take a shaving cream has a polyethylene glycol. Why they are using a polyethylene glycol in the shaving cream? Because it is highly hygroscopic in nature. It will absorb and retain water molecules. It is hydrophilic compound. All polyethylene glycol are hydrophilic compound. It will absorb moisture and it will retain moisture. Now let us go back. If these coiled structures are highly hydrophilic, and if it loves water, and if it can retain more amount of water, what will happen? So it will start to absorb water and it will start to retain water, and finally it will look like a water ball. So the immune system, as soon as the immune system analyzes this, it will think that it is a water ball. It is a water droplet. So it won't consider it as a foreign body. It will consider it as a water ball. So it won't generate any immune response for those water particles. So obviously you can, or the uric acid which is present inside that water ball can escape from the immune system. So this is the hypothesis. Okay. So people are using polyethylene glycol, and people used polyethylene glycol, and it is FDA approved, and currently in market there are two products, two medicines. One is Crystacea, which is produced by Savian Pharmaceuticals. So here itself you can see it is a pegylated medicine, so you can inject, so you can avoid. Now, why still research is going on? So when there is a commercially available pegylated compound, why still research is going on? So still research is going on because later people started to find these. Of course, these are the other pegylated compounds which are commercially available, which are researched. So aspergillus is pegylated, superoxidase dismutase is also pegylated, arginase is pegylated. So all these are pegylated, and extensive research has happened in the pegylation. And uricase is pegylated with the different types of polyethylene glycol. You can use a straight chain polyethylene glycol. So it is a polyethylene glycol. It is a polymer. It is a polymer of ethylene glycol. So many number of ethylene glycol is attached, and you can vary the structure of a polyethylene glycol. I can create a single chain. I can create a branched chain. That's why people tried different types of a polyethylene glycol. Sometimes functionalized polyethylene glycol. So you can see MPEG, simple PEG, linear PEG, branched PEG, and monomethoxy PEG. Monomethoxy PEG is a functionalized polyethylene glycol. All these polyethylene glycols are commercially available. You can buy these polyethylene glycol from Sigma Aldrich. And apart from these polyethylene glycol, there are still few other polyethylene glycols. If you take a simple single chain polyethylene glycol, there are different molecular weight polyethylene glycol. Polyethylene glycol molecular weight varying from 30 to 3000, 4000. Okay, so we also did research on using different polyethylene glycol and conjugating it. Okay, so now what are the limitations of polyethylene glycol? Polyethylene glycol, of course, FDA has approved it. People are pharmaceutical industries are using this PEG for conjugation and for some other purpose also in the pharmaceutical world. But later people started to found this polyethylene glycol is non-biodegradable. Since it is non-biodegradable, it means that it cannot be that easily degraded in the body. When it cannot degrade in the body, then it will start to accumulate inside the body if you are using a long chain polyethylene glycol. And of course, it has a long-term side effects. What happens? This polyethylene glycol starts to accumulate in the tissues. Tissues means not normal tissues, in all sort of tissues. People have reported that these polyethylene glycol starts to accumulate even in the kidney tissues. Okay, so later they could able to find polyethylene glycol in the tissues of a kidney, and of course, earlier people thought that this polyethylene glycol is non-immunogenic, non-toxic, but recently people started to report that these polyethylene glycol are toxic, non-biodegradable, and it starts to accumulate inside the body. Okay, and it produces and it induces our immune system to respond for that PEG. So because of these, now people are thinking what could be the alternative for PEG. Of course, people didn't stop using this PEG. Still in market, pegylated medicines are available because there is no alternate. See, people could not able to establish any alternate for PEG. Still it is in the research world. Still it is in the research phase. So that's why people are still trying to find which could be an alternate for PEG. So now, since PEG is extensively used, PEG is extensively researched, even it is commercially available. So we started to think, why don't we use polysialic acid and hydroxyethyl starch? And this talk is about bioconjugation of uric acid using polysialic acid. I didn't include the results of hydroxyethyl starch. So what is the benefit of this polysialic acid, which is generally called as polysialization? So it is a polymer of N-acetyl-neuramic acid. So PSA, polysialic acid, has a reduced immunogenicity, and it has an increased circulatory half-life, and it is highly hydrophobic, just like PEG, and it is easily biodegradable. And PSA interferes with the host immune system, and it also deactivates the phagocytic activity. Okay, so because of these disadvantages, we thought, okay, why don't we try polysialic acid to conjugate with the uric acid? Of course, PSA can be linked with, and how to link it? Of course, if I don't have a proper functional group on this polysialic acid, I cannot bind this polysialic acid with my uric acid. What I told, what hypothesis I said? I want to use the surface accessible functional group on the uric acid so that I can conjugate that surface accessible functional group with some other chemical so that I can create a chemical attachment. So PSA can be linked with epsilon amino group of a lysine. This is the hypothesis we used, and we could able to successfully prove our hypothesis. So we used a surface accessible epsilon amino group, which is there on the lysine, and even this N-terminal group of the protein also has a surface accessible amino acid. I can use our amino group. I can use it to attach. Okay, so polysialated enzyme. So it is a catalase. Okay, let us move to the reaction methodology. So this is the reaction methodology, polysialic acid. So we used uric acid from Orthobacter globifermis, which is purchased from Sigma Aldrich, and polysialic acid 10 kilodalton. Since it is a polysialic acid, it is also a polymer. So you can buy polysialic acid of a different molecular weight, or you can use a different molecular weight also. So I used a 10 kilodalton molecular weight. Of course, there is a meaning why we are using a 10 kilodalton molecular weight. And peroxidase or periodate oxidation using sodium metaperiodate. So now I have to activate this polysialic acid because polysialic acid doesn't have a functional group that can be attached with the surface accessible amine group or epsilon amine group of a uric acid. So I have to activate this polysialic acid. So I'm using sodium metaperiodate as an activating agent or a reducing agent. You may ask, sir, on what basis you selected this sodium metaperiodate? Of course, there are only few reducing agents. You can try one by one. And of course, all those reducing agents are going to do the same job. But the presence of reducing agents, or how the presence of reducing agents in the reaction mixture is going to affect the activity of uric acid. Okay. Your uric acid has a certain amount of activity. As soon as you synthesize, as soon as your bacterial species produces this uric acid, it will have certain activity. And of course, you know how to produce an enzyme using a shake flask studies or a fermenter studies. And as soon as uric acid is produced in that medium, you cannot use directly. You have to purify it. So during purification, of course, you are going to use either you will be using a harsh condition. Of course, you have to use a harsh condition to separate or purify that enzyme. Obviously, when you are using a harsh condition, that will denature or that will reduce the activity of an enzyme. So while separating or while purifying the enzyme from those broth itself, shake flask broth or a reactor broth, the enzyme is going to lose activity. For example, let us assume the uric acid what I produced from this bacterial stain as 9 unit per ml. Now you may ask, what is that 9 unit per ml? Okay, how are you defining activity? So in the coming slides, I will tell you what is the activity. Of course, many of you know how to define activity. So if I say it is 9 unit per ml, the raw enzyme which is produced from the microorganism in the reaction or in the medium. Now after purification, I'm going to lose this activity. It may be 6 or 7. And if I still lose the activity because of the reducing agent, then there is no meaning in bioconjugating this uric acid with polysialic acid. So my reaction condition should not reduce the uric acid activity a lot. Till now, there is no reaction which will not reduce the activity of uric acid. All the reactions which are published in the research world has certain effect on the activity of a uric acid. Now, of course, that's why even the pharmaceutical companies are doing these research. Now, which is the best reaction condition or which is the best reaction combinations that will not reduce the uric acid activity a lot. Okay, of course, there is a trade-off. Now, oxidized PSA, and I have to purify dialysis and lyophilize it, and I have to add a uric acid. It is a simple reductive amination. So people who know, who could able to remember the chemistry subject what you learned. So this reaction, reaction between the activated PSA and uric acid is a reductive amination. It is a reaction between aldehyde and amine group. Aldehyde is CHO, amine group is NH2+. Okay, very simple. This is the chemistry. Okay, so reductive amination. So very simple reaction. Now I can that reaction will give finally uric acid and the PSA conjugate. So this is a reductive amination. These are the reaction protocols. So I used different ratios of UZ and PSA, PSA and the reducing agent. This is the typical way to perform a reaction. If you feel that this way is a time consuming, this way is costly, I don't want to waste chemicals, then you can use statistical method. You use statistical method, reduce the number of experiments, and you will end up with the limited number of experiments that you can perform. Okay, so, and reductive amination using sodium. Then we also tried with other reducing agents, because the first reducing agent we could not able to achieve a satisfactory activity. So that's why we tried another reducing agent also, which is sodium metaperoxidate, and this is another reducing agent. Then after reducing it, I have to characterize it. So why I have to characterize? For what and all I have to characterize? I need to know what is the residual activity. What is the meaning of residual activity? After completing my bioconjugation reaction, what activity that uric acid will have, which is called as residual activity. Of course, and after bioconjugation, I have to purify also. So after purification, how much losses will be there? So normally we characterized using the activity, so enzyme activity. So enzyme activity of a pure uric acid is assayed according to, so this is the formula. So 1 unit of uric acid is defined as the amount of uric acid enzyme which converts 1 micromole of uric acid to allantoin per minute at a pH 9 at 25 degrees Celsius. This is the formula to calculate activity, the units per ml. Okay, so and to know whether bioconjugation has happened or not, what is the meaning of bioconjugation? Attaching a compound on the surface of the uric acid. So to know the to quantify the bioconjugation, we did even so SDS page, and this is the typical protocol for SDS page analysis. Even using this SDS page analysis, if somebody wants to know what is the change in the molecular weight, not accurately, approximately, you can find that. Okay, and I can even find the degree of modification of uric acid. So what is the modification, or what change has happened on the uric acid since you are attaching? So what are the, or what is the degree of change happened in that uric acid? I cannot precisely say which amino acid got changed. If I want to do that, I have to do CDS. So CDS is costly, and we don't have a CDS. Of course, we did CDS to publish our research outcome. And this is one way to find the modification, that is a TNBS assay. So we did a TNBS assay to analyze the changes on the surface of the uric acid. Okay. So what and all, and we did stability analysis So why we need to do a stability analysis now after bioconjugation? I have to if I want to commercialize it, I have to store it. I have to store it in the vial, and then I have to prescribe on the vial that what is the or how long I can store it, or under which condition I can store it. So to know that we did temperature stability, and to know I cannot sell, or I cannot commercialize, or I cannot commercialize this uricase or bioconjugated uricase in a solidified form or in a lyophilized form. So I have to send it in the liquid form. So I have to use a buffer. Normally we use a borate buffer, but borate buffer of what pH? So which pH will not affect the stability of uricase bioconjugate. And the kinetic studies. So what is the selectivity of this uricase with respect to uric acid? Okay, so we calculated Km value, and based on the Km value, you can say the affinity of this towards the enzyme, towards the chemical, which is uric acid. And even we did immunogenicity studies. So to know how immunogenic this combination of this bioconjugated uricase will be. And we did, of course, we didn't have any animal house. We did all this in Kasturibai Medical College. So we did immunogenicity studies in the Australian rabbits. So we injected our pure uricase, bioconjugated uricase in the rabbit, and we started to collect the blood, and we started to separate the antibodies, and then we did we used ELISA titer kit, and then we found whether there is any reduction in the immunogenicity. Yeah. So this is the protocol we use to measure the antibody titer using ELISA kit. So we determined the working titer for anti-uricase anti-serum. This is a post-immune serum and pre-immune serum. And we used antibody neutralization assay. So we used a rabbit anti-serum, which is serially diluted PBS buffer, and then we allowed to react with a native and conjugated uricase for 1 hour. And the residual activity of a native and conjugated uricase after reaction is measured. I think most of you know about this. I don't want to detailedly discuss about this. If I have to discuss, it may take another 10 minutes. So I'll just run through the results and discussions, or the outcome of our research. This is one part of our, this is one small outcome from our research. So we used uric PSA as a bioconjugating element, and this is the reaction mechanism. So this is how we could able to attach a polysialic acid on the surface of the uricase. So a simple reductiomination, and we varied the uricase and PSA ratio. And this table is very important. The reason why I am telling this table is very important is you just we go through the table. Specific activity 5.94, and when I use 1:100, when I am increasing the PSA from 50 to 200, the specific activity reduces, or the residual activity reduces. Okay. Now, when I calculated the percentage substitution, so how many PSAs are attached on the surface of the uricase? So that is increasing, because I am adding more amount of PSA. Obviously, more number of PSA will go and bind with the uricase. That is a known trend. Okay. Now, since more number of PSA is going and binding on the surface of the uricase, the residual activity is going down. Why it could be? The activity of a uricase is not changing, because I'm using the same reaction condition. Only thing is I'm increasing the concentration of PSA. When I'm increasing only the concentration of a PSA, When I am maintaining the reaction condition as such, activity should not reduce, but still activity reduces. So what could be the problem, or what could be the reason? So the reason is in the last column. So since percentage substitution is increasing, more and more number of PSA is going and attaching on the surface of uricase, it is masking the uricase to a larger extent. When it is masking the uricase to a larger extent, then the active sites on the surface of the uricase is non-accessible. Okay, so since it is non-accessible, of course, there is no reduction in the activity. Activity is as such. So you could not able to access the active sites on the surface of the uricase. So when I could not able to access the active sites of the uricase, then there is no meaning in using that uricase for reducing the uric acid in the blood. Now you may ask how uric acid will be reduced. Okay, so since uric acid is there in the dissolved form, this uric acid can easily diffuse through those water body on the surface of the uricase, and it can easily reach the uric acid. When it cannot diffuse that much, when there is a more and more amount of mass transfer resistance, obviously when percentage substitution increases, mass transfer resistance will increase. When mass transfer resistance increases, obviously uric acid which is present in the blood cannot reach the uricase which is there in the core of the bioconjugated uricase. So obviously there is no meaning in using. So now as a researcher, you have to decide which combination is best. So now here, if you see the table, so 1:200 gives more substitution, 80.02% substitution we could able to achieve. But there is a huge reduction in the activity. So we are using 51. So we used 1:150 ratio for our further analysis. Reason is 1:150 ratio gave a reasonable percentage residual activity and gave a reasonable percentage substitution. Okay. So this is how we decided to use 1:150 ratio. Now, different reducing agent, of course, as we increase the reducing agent, so the percentage substitution reduces, and then effect of reducing agents on the enzyme activity. Of course, it is a sodium cyanoborate. Since cyanide, it is a sodium cyanoborate. Obviously, it will try to reduce the reducing agent. It will try to reduce the activity of uricase. That's what happened. As we increase the, use the different reducing agents, the activity reduces to a lot. See, the first line is nothing but pure uricase. Pure uricase itself has ability to lose its activity. See, when time is 70th hour, there is a reduction in the activity. Initial specific activity is around 18. After 70 hours, it is just a 17. It means that if you don't do anything to that uricase, its activity is reducing. It loses its activity. So it means that if you keep that uricase for a longer period of a time, for example, if you analyze its activity after 7 days or after 10 days, it may not have any activity at all. It will be a dead enzyme. So it cannot be used for curing the gout disease at all. Okay. So this is using another reducing agent. And then this is a SDS page image. So you could able to see, so this is the first lane is marker. The commercially purchased marker is used, and second lane is pure uricase, which is commercially purchased. So 5 milligram, which is 40,000 in sigma Aldrich. So we purchased that, and you could able to see only one band at 30 kilodalton. And you may ask, sir, uricase is a tetramer, so how it exactly is in the 30 kilodalton? Normally, before loading the sample in the SDS page, we broke it, and then we used used only one subunit, and then we stretched it, and then we loaded it. That's why you could able to see only one single band at 30 kilodalton, which is 34 kilodalton, which is the molecular weight of one subunit. And lane 3 and lane 4 are nothing but conjugated complex. So you could able to see many bands. So, and you could able to see even the band at the 34 kilodalton. It means that some uric acid or some unconjugated uric acid are still there, and some conjugated uric acid are there. And see, if conjugated uric acid is there, we know the molecular weight of PSA, we know the molecular weight of uric acid. And if I add these two molecular weight, I should know the molecular weight of conjugated uric acid. So, which is 45 kilodalton. But above 45 kilodalton also there are small bands. And below 45 kilodalton also, 45 kilodalton also, there are few bands. So, it means that uric acid, bioconjugation of uric acid with PSA is not happening with only one PSA or two PSA or three PSA molecule. It arbitrarily happens. In some uric acid molecule, only one PSA is attaching. In some uric acid molecule, maybe 4 PSA molecules may be attaching. Because of that, there is no, we could not able to get one single band in the third and the fourth lane. This is the stability analysis. Stability with temperature 37, 25 and 37. 37 is the physiological temperature. And this is storage analysis after storing it. So whether there is reduction in the activity, and of course there is a reduction in the activity, but conjugate activity is slightly higher than the unconjugated activity. So that itself is a proof that conjugation improves the stability of the uric acid. Okay. So if you conjugate, you can store it for a longer period of time. And this is a pH stability analysis. So of course, everywhere it drops. This is kinetic analysis, Km value. This is the Km value of a native uric acid 4.18 in 10 to the power 5, Km value of conjugate 5.46 into the. So UC Km value similar to the, of course, it is similar to the earlier list. So increase in Km value, decrease in affinity of the substrate to the enzyme. So since the Km value of a conjugated uric acid has increased, the affinity towards the substrate has slightly reduced. Obviously, it has to happen. Okay, since it is since the uric acid is now surrounded by a mask, obviously affinity towards the substrate will reduce. So what I should do, sir, is there is any way to improve the Km value or to reduce the Km value so that I can increase the affinity towards the substrate? Of course, you can do. So instead of using PSA, you use some other highly branched compound so that mass transfer resistance will be less, so that uric acid can easily penetrate and it can reach the core, which is there, which is uric acid. So obviously, affinity towards the substrate will increase. Okay. This is the immunological study. So antibody neutralization assay. So native uric acid. So still 1:50 has a very high value, very high residual activity. So by conjugating polysialic acid with the uric acid, we could able to, this is for hydroxyethyl starch. So I didn't put the slides of uric acid and hydroxyethyl starch just to show even hydroxyethyl starch can be used for conjugation. So I've just pasted I've just put the SDS page of hydroxyethyl starch. So you could able to see the bands. So here only few bands are there. Only one bands are there. Other bands are not there. This is hydroxyethyl starch. So with this, I would like to conclude. So the conclusion of this talk is, since you people are students, there is a huge scope in this area. As your head of the department said, there is a huge while introducing about this webinar, he said he told about some numbers. So some numbers of vacancies are there, and out of that some percentages for this, some percentages for that. And I produced 3 PhDs from this topic. not from this topic, from bioconjugation, I could able to produce two PhD students, and those two are working in pharmaceutical industry. And their response is all pharmaceutical industries have opened a separate division for this type of bioconjugation work. I never thought that this will be this will have a huge scope, because reproducibility in this research is very difficult, because uricase has just a 9 or a 10 or a 20 units per ml, and if you purify, there will be a loss. If you bioconjugate, there will be a loss. If you further purify, there will be a loss. At the end, you may have 1 or a 0.7 or 0.4 activity. So if you have, at the end, if you have only 0.1 or 0.7 or 0.5 active uricase, there is no meaning in using that in the human body. That's why I felt, of course, this area is a little dry, because reproducibility is very less, and we have to be very careful while performing experiment, and it took a lot of time for to establish. But when my student told about the pharmaceutical, the extensive investment of a pharmaceutical industries in this field, and I start to realize, of course, people are now, the pharmaceutical world is now looking for this, and the takeaway from this talk is, if somebody wants to work in this area, so you have to mentally prepare that how much hard work you have to do, and how much patient you should be, and how much careful you should be while performing. Of course, in the first few days, you won't get any result, because if you don't store it properly, even if there is a small fluctuation in the storage temperature, the bottle what you're going to purchase, 5 milligram bottle, which is now 34,000 in sigma average, will be a waste. Okay, so you have to store it properly. If you open it, you have to use as early as possible. You cannot think that today I'm purchasing this bottle. Okay, after 2 months, today I'm performing one experiment. Okay, after 2-3 months, let us perform another experiment. That is not at all possible. But in 10 days, all those uricase will lose its activity. Then there is no meaning in using those uricase for bioconjugation. So this area is a little, of course, bio area itself is a little sensitive area, but this is too sensitive. So and it has a lot of scope, and people are now working left and right in this area to find a new drug or a new combinations. So a lot of scope is there. So I hope this 45 minutes or 40 minutes talk might have given basic idea in this area. So if somebody wants to work in this area, if somebody wants to do research in this area, I think this 40 minutes discussion will definitely help them. So with these words, I conclude my talk, and before handing over my session to one of your organizers, I would like to thank Dr. Srikumar of the Biotechnology Department at St. Joseph College of Engineering, and the organizer and the person who contacted me, Dr. Renuga Vishwanathan, and the student organizers and the administration, St. Joseph management. I thank all of them for giving this opportunity to share my views on this bioconjugation area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for an informative session on gout and conjugated uricase for treating the diseases. We now have 2 questions, sir. So can you answer them?
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, sir. So the first question is, you said that through evolution, the gene that produces uricase became inactive. Why can't it become active again?
If you make it active, then you may not have antioxidant in your body. You have to take external antioxidant, or body has to search some other antioxidant. This has happened for more than 10, 20, 30,000 years. So body has its own intelligence. Based on its intelligence, it has finally come to a conclusion. Uric acid can be one of the antioxidants that can be used to scavenge the free radicals. So if you activate those genes and if you start to produce uricase, then uricase will convert all the uric acid to allantoin. Then your body may not have sufficient antioxidant to scavenge the free radicals.
Okay, sir. And the next question is, will masking the enzyme surface by using polymers decrease the uricase's activity?
Of course, it will decrease. Now it is a simple trade-off. What companies are doing, what researchers are doing. So people are now trying to identify a new compound. People are now trying to identify a uric acid which should have a very high activity. People are now trying to find a best combination. On what basis? It should have less immunogenicity. It should have a high residual activity. Obviously, it will, while masking, you are reducing the activity. You cannot avoid that. But I can reduce the reduction. How can I do? By selecting proper bioconjugating element or by producing a highly active uric acid.
Okay, so thank you, sir. Thank you very much. With that, we wind up with the questions. Thank you for taking the time to answer some of the questions that our participants had, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I now call upon our convener, Dr. Renuka Vishwanathan, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the Department of Biotechnology, St. Joseph College of Engineering, on this webinar, BioTalk Series Week 3 program on bioconjugation of therapeutic enzyme uricase for gout disease. I am grateful to our management, St. Joseph College of Engineering and St. Joseph Group of Institutions, Chairman Dr. B. Babu Manoharan sir, Managing Director Mrs. Jessipriya ma'am, and Director Mr. Sasi Shekhar for providing us this opportunity and platform to host this webinar. I am also thankful to our Principal Dr. V. Seshagiri Rao and Dean Dr. M. Parvatavardhani for their encouragement. My hearty thanks to our HOD Dr. G. Sri Kumar for his constant guidance and moral support. I would also like to extend my thanks to the faculty of the Biotech Department for their cooperation. My special thanks to the organizer of this webinar, Ms. D. Kalavati, for the efforts and preparations in making this event a success. I wholeheartedly thank our distinguished speaker, Dr. P. Jagadish Babu, for his ready acceptance and for his very informative and wonderful presentation on the use of uricase for gout disease. I thank all the participants who have shown interest in taking part in this webinar. I extend my thanks to the student organizers from third year biotechnology for their untimely support. Lastly, I thank the Almighty for making this event a success. Thank you, one and all.
Once again, I'd like to thank you all for attending this session. I hope to see you all in future events organized by the Department of Biotechnology from St. Joseph's College of Engineering. Thank you.